So I am not a fan of current modern car interiors. Yes, the materials have gotten nicer. Yes, the materials are nice. Great. Who cares, right? But the problem is all of the screens. Ask any enthusiast. And screens, in my opinion as an enthusiast, but ask any enthusiast, and they don't like screens. Screens in cars, if anything, are pretty problematic. Yet consumers, all the general public seems to want is screens on everything. Screens in the gauge cluster, screens in the center stack, 2 screens in the center stack, screens in front of the passenger, screens on the back seats, screens above the back seats. And I think it's too much. And here's this. A prominent designer who, by the way, works for Maserati. And they said his name is Klaus Busse, B-U-S-S-E, Busse. I'm not sure how you pronounce that. But Klaus is the global head of design for Maserati. And I have to give a hat tip to Jerry Perez from The Drive for actually doing the interview with Klaus Busse, B-U-S-S-E. I'll reserve the right as an American to mispronounce that. I'll just keep changing the pronunciation. But with that, they asked about gauge clusters and screens and things like that. And they asked, why are there so many screens? Why can't we get back to physical buttons? And Mr. Klaus says, quote, "We use screens because there are so many features in a car that if I were to put a button for everything, the cabin would look like an old 747. Of course, he's referring to the aircraft and, an airplane cockpit, you could say, to simplify that. He goes on to say, quote, "The idea is to organize things in a screen so that only presents to the driver what they need at the moment. The screen only presents to the driver what they need at that moment." And now this guy has led design for Chrysler, Jeep, Dodge about a decade ago. That was kind of before the whole screen revolution. And he currently works with things like Maserati right now, but he's also worked with Alfa Romeo. He's worked with Fiat, Maserati, like I said. But he says that he himself is not a big fan of touchscreens, but that he firmly believes they are the right answer in today's vehicles. I have to look. I don't care if he's a world-renowned designer. I don't care if he's worked for Jeep, Dodge, Ram, Alfa, Maserati. I don't care. He doesn't know what he's talking about. His whole resume, I'm sure his resume on LinkedIn is extensive, and none of it matters. Because I, as your humble radio show host, I think I know better than this designer, by the way. And what I mean by that is, for one, I've had this debate before on the show that screens are inferior to buttons for many reasons, especially in the interior of a car, and for safety reasons. In fact, there was a study not too long ago that proved the distance traveled on the road with your eyes off of the road, because you're messing with the screen, to do something like change the climate control, change the vent position. The distance to do that is much greater than it would be had you been using buttons to accomplish those tasks. And not only that, if you were using buttons to accomplish those tasks, you wouldn't even need to take your eyes off the road in the first place, because you could do it by feel and by muscle memory, something that you cannot do on a touchscreen, really. And so he says, and going back to this, the cabin would, quote, look like an old 747. So the safety thing aside, I just made an argument for the safety and the practical purpose of buttons. But he's a designer. I get it. Designers design things to look cool. Like, talking about like artists, right? They're not always engineers, though. Automotive designers obviously closely work with engineers, but that's not, they're not necessarily engineers, but they don't have to be, right? Their job is to make stuff look cool, to make things engaging, to make things useful and pleasing to the eye. And he says that looking like an old 747 is not pleasing to the eye. And that I will have you find is completely false in my entirely unbiased opinion. And that is that I actually want my car to look like the interior of a 747. Why? Because the interior of a 747 looks cool. That's why. That's actually what I want. Look at all of the cars. Hear me out. Look at all of the cars over the years that have deliberately modeled their interiors off of aircraft because aircraft are cool. They're seen as technical and advanced and interesting, even though the world of, well, at least general aviation, everyone's flying around like 70-year-old airplanes now, but that's not the point. It's still cool because as a driver, I want to be in command of the vehicle. I want to feel like I'm the pilot. See what I'm saying there? And I want gauges. I want things. I want knobs and fiddly stuff that looks cool when I'm using it, even if I'm only turning up the gauge cluster brightness. I want it to look cool. I want to feel like a fighter pilot doing it. And what do fighter planes have? Tons of buttons. 747, not quite a fighter plane, quite in fact the opposite, but it also has lots of buttons. It's really, really cool, right? Now, I speak for the enthusiast. I get that the average driver on the road maybe doesn't want all these buttons, that maybe it's a bit overwhelming. And to that, I think there is a common middle ground, and that is what manufacturers like, I'm going to say it, but Toyota are doing in their current lineup. Especially the new stuff right now, the new Land Cruiser, the new 4Runner, the new Tacoma. Yeah, you've got a screen, and the screen has menus and functions to adjust other things, and stuff that you really don't need to mess with while you're driving, while you're doing stuff. You don't really need to do that. You can take a second and go through the menus, and I'm going to adjust this, and I'm going to change this little insignificant setting. But things like climate control, I really dislike how Tesla handles climate control. You got that center screen, and I just want to move a vent, right? Like, oh, hey, the AC's blowing in my face just a little too much, right? Well, I could just move a vent normally on a car. Just reach over and slide the vent over. But on the Tesla, you got to go into the center screen, go to climate control, and then like move around on the touchscreen where you want the air to point. I don't want to point where I want the air to go. I just want to slide the vent there. I mean, yes, it looks cool and it looks sophisticated if you want your car to look and feel like an iPhone. Enthusiasts don't want that, but I think what brands like Toyota have realized is that a lot of common drivers don't want that either. Ask a lot of folks on the road who will say, well, yeah, the touchscreen is just too complicated. I just don't like it. I don't like having to go through menus to find stuff. And that is, I think, something that perhaps the not very vocal majority agrees with. That's what I think. Obviously, the people who are your very vocal minority in this case are people like your tech reviewers, your people who want really high-end luxury cars. You're spending a ton of money, and they want to feel like they're, at the helm of the Enterprise or something, right? But with, I'm not talking like original series Enterprise, Star Trek nerd here, right? I'm talking like next generation. It's all touchscreens and stuff. They want to feel like that. And that, I think, catering your automobile, if you're a manufacturer, catering what you're building to the wants and desires of the few is maybe not the best way to actually make something that just works. I mean, you look at the most simple designs in history, and they're basic, they're simple. There's no menus, there's no touch screens, there's none of that. And so to this designer, Klaus Boos, he says that having the cabin look like the interior of a 747 is a bad thing. I don't agree with that at all. And, I think more folks would actually perhaps, I could be entirely wrong. I know I'm not, but I could be. More folks, could maybe think, oh, that's too many buttons. That's overwhelming. I don't know how too many buttons being overwhelming can be much of a problem, though, because you look, okay, I want to turn on the heated seats. I've got these buttons, and these. Okay, these ones have the seat picture on them. I'll push that button. Like, really? I think we need to get back to basics on cars. And we're seeing this with trends in automotive, automotive buying trends. Not necessarily new cars, but look how much money people are paying these days for classic cars. Cars from the 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s now. Pretty much any car before 2000, even cars in the early 2000s now, are fetching a lot of money. The used car market is strong. The new car market has been slow. There have been challenges with that. New cars are more expensive than ever. And I'm not just saying that people want to buy used cars because they have less buttons in them. But that is one thing. You ask someone who spends $50,000 on a classic truck. Think, let's say a Chevy, a C10. They're going for crazy money. And you ask someone, what do they like about it? What do they like about the interior? They'll probably say, it's simple. I can just turn the heat on. It's basic. There's nothing there to get in the way. I think we need to get back to that. Let me know your thoughts. Facebook.com/Automotive ADHD. And yes, I want my car looking like a 747. I would actually just drive a 747 around on the road if I could, but I can't. So